This episode is brought to you by Sheath. You can go to sheathunderwear.com and discover the most comfortable underwear ever created. Now, what makes Sheath underwear different? Well, for men, on the inside of the underwear, there is a dual pouch. That means separate compartments for your manhood. Imagine a silky, smooth pouch on the inside that your boys slide right into that keeps you separate from your legs, so there's no more sticking, no more chafing, no more need for readjustment. We all know that little move you have to make to kind of peel the bad boys off of the leg. Well, with Sheath, that is a thing of the past. There are several fabrics to choose from modal to bamboo. My personal favorite is the bamboo. It's a newly launched product that everyone seems to really love. I highly recommend trying the bamboo Sheath underwear if you have not ever given yourself the gift of true comfort. Wearing these underwear truly sets a new precedent for what underwear are, and for most people, I think they end up switching entirely over to Sheath, because when you put on your old underwear after trying these, they just don't cut it anymore. You can try Sheath risk-free. There is a 100% money-back guarantee on your first pair. So go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code TIMEWHEEL to save 20%. I've been involved with Sheath since its conception. It was founded by my brother, Robert Patton, who is a U.S. military vet, who during the course of his 2 tours to Iraq developed this product out of need. Need is the mother of invention, as he likes to say, and he did a great job bringing this awesome product to the world. Again, that's sheathunderwear.com, promo code TIMEWHEEL. This episode is also brought to you by Ohana Kava Bar. Go to ohanakavabar.com and check out their selection. Ohana means family, and it is spelled O-H-A-N-A, and Kava is spelled K-A-V-A. You can order directly from their website, and they will mail you high-quality kava. If you don't already know, kava is a plant medicine, an herbal supplement, a replacement for alcohol. It is an incredible experience. I have used kava for years now. I love it. It makes you chill, happy, vibey. It is a communal and ceremonial beverage to unwind with at the end of your day. If you haven't given kava a try, I highly recommend it. Again, go to ohanakavabar.com and use promo code TIMEWHEEL to save 10%. Their store offers classic kava, instant kava, kava tinctures, kava capsules, and more, all of which I have tried and all work incredibly well. ohanakavabar.com, promo code TIMEWHEEL.
Greetings, and Accessing archive. Authorizing. Access granted. Accessing file.
How you doing, man?
Are you starting with the triggering questions?
Mm-hmm.
I plead the fifth. Nowadays, when people ask me how I'm doing, I just plead the fifth, and I ask for simpler questions that I can answer definitively, like, what did you have for breakfast? Or that sort of thing. No, I'm all right. I have a lot to be grateful for. It's obviously been a weird year as the flaming tip of the sword of a lot of weird years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very surreal. I'm in South Florida right now, and I'm looking after my elderly father who has Alzheimer's. So it is a very surreal deal. But like I said, I have a lot to be grateful for. So I'm going to continue to operate from that vantage point. How about yourself? How are you?
Absolutely. That's good. That's all we can do is try to be grateful for everything we do have. Absolutely. I'm good, busy, I'm just trying to keep the time wheel ball rolling, my work with my brother's company, Sheath, and, keep the podcast going as well and create music. There's so many things to do. But
Absolutely. The busyness factor, I think, is kind of a saving grace. Like, I have one of my songs called Silent Sirens, and in it there's a phrase. It's actually in the chorus. It says, "With my craft as my raft, we brace the rowdy rapids and row," which is
100%.
exactly that feeling, of you're being chased by your monsters, and the best thing you can do is keep yourself productively, creatively busy to at once keep them at bay and
Right.
at the same time integrate them and store them away and encode them into various creative transmutations.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly what you just said, I feel is our purpose. Like, I feel that's the purpose of what we're here to do. We're going to come into this existence with a certain level of baggage attached to us through our family and our culture and all these things. But, like, it doesn't mean you have to create music, but you create something. You create life with the circumstances you're given. And really the best thing you could do is put energy towards trying to make a beautiful life, trying to beautify your life starting where you're at. It's funny because people almost feel like, well, I wasn't dealt a good deck of or a good hand of cards, so how am I to play with these cards? And it's like, well, you got to.
Yeah. I mean, one way to look at it is a deck that we've been dealt, and to think of it as a kind of gambling endeavor, which in some sense it is. I mean, the stakes are really high, and I like to think of it as playing with everything at stake and nothing to lose, and just put all your chips on life. But another way to look at it is, and I've been thinking about this recently, that time equals life force, right? Like, the passage of time is really the measure of life force moving through us, and we all have a finite amount. And if you sometimes we want to dilate time, and we want to forcibly dilate time and just get more done than we can in a moment. So when the hourglass constipates, it's important not to try and force it or push it through, because then you end up with what I call chronoroids, which are like temporal hemorrhoids. So to take your time and to allow it to unfold as it comes, I think, is an important element of it. But also to recognize, like you were just saying, that time and life force is something, it's a currency, it's a resource that we spend into the world. And that expenditure of life force, in a sense, is us dying, but that's also enlivening the world. The act of life is really just death's live stream. So, like, live stream to death is what we get to experience. And when we think of it that way, that every creative act is an encoding of intention into the world, then the prints that we leave on the world, that's kind of our shaping of the collective soul, and the earning or creating or crafting or shaping
Right.
of our own soul. So even if you take away all the fantasies of an afterlife or all these perspectives that take us outside of the here and now, we can think of it as what we say, what we do, what we create. They're all opportunities to immortalize ourselves, because ultimately the reverberations of our acts and words are what carries on into future generations. Like you said, the baggage we've carried from our parents and from past generations, the world we're living in is a kind of, it's the, the last guest didn't clean up after themselves, so so
Mm-hmm.
we gotta sit in their filth and try to shape it into some garbage sculptures that we can all enjoy and that remind us of our story and set the signposts to lead ourselves and future generations fluently through the flesh.
That's it. That's it. And I think what you had said about leaving our imprint, here on the earth, so many people I think could get that easily confused with um, you wanting your name known and you want all the glory. I think that every creative thing that you do leaves an imprint for other creatives to pick up and carry that torch. And you
Mm-hmm.
could be just a way that you started painting, and then they start painting that way for all of this time, and then, or it's the type of music that you played, and then everyone kind of picked that up, but they're not saying Mozart in their head every time they
Right.
do a string of notes that maybe a Mozart made popular. But like, that's the thing, is like, it's not about needing to get all the credit and the glory and have it be attached to your name. As
Mm-hmm.
long as you're creating in the world, even if like 10 people see it, it doesn't matter about how many people see it and how successful it is. If it means something deep to you, that helps you, but it also creates that imprint for future people, even if it's just the tiniest bit of influence they could pick up from that thing to then
Mm-hmm.
carry forward. You know what I mean? It's like we're adding to the Akashic records, so to speak, of creative database for future generations to draw from. Like, it's not, if your name doesn't get known, you did a bad job. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think people need to get over that a little bit.
Well, what you're describing in a sense is trailblazing. Is to blaze a trail where there was none before, so that others can
Mm-hmm.
also follow that path. And maybe it's only 5 steps into the brush, but then the next person can come through and they can take their machete to it. And ultimately, we're
Mm-hmm.
sharpening the tools. Like what you're saying, somebody like Mozart took the instrument and found out where the limits were, and then pushed those limits, pushed the envelope, so that
Mm-hmm.
now other people can also follow in those footsteps. And maybe, maybe the trail gets named after us. There's no shame in that either. And maybe the imprint we leave is a brand, like on a cattle, like a cattle brand.
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, yeah, it's really just, I think it's important to create in whatever capacity we can, because through creating, we align ourselves with creation and with the
Mm-hmm.
creative force that is in
Right.
in all of life. The life force is, we get
Mm-hmm.
to, like Pink Floyd said, play along with time.
Mm-hmm. And speaking on bands like Pink Floyd, I kind of like to remember and keep the spirit alive of when you hear a piece of art, you don't immediately scramble to know what do they look like,
Mm-hmm.
what gender are they, are they this ethnicity, or what part of the world are they from. Just enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I mean? Like, we're probably, it's kind of like an ultimate destiny to probably find out who it is if you're going to actually become a fan. But I just think there's so much attached to persona these days. Everyone wants to be somebody. Yeah, on social media, it's easy to kind of make yourself look like somebody, right? It's kind
Right.
of like look like you're doing all this awesome stuff, and maybe you are, and that's great. But it's an interesting thing how much more effort goes into that than the work, right?
Right. Well, I think of those things like the persona. The persona is kind of like, it's the front man of the self, right? It's
Hmm.
the mask. It's literally, the word persona came from the Greek amphitheaters, where it was a mask with a megaphone for a mouthpiece, through which
Hmm.
sound, personas, through sound, we would transmit ourselves. And those things are, they're just like the ego is kind of a representative of the self, but it's a self-imitating limitation that we set. So
Well, and it also, we only have a finite amount of energy
right.
to do what we're here to do. And if we're going to put 30% of our day in making sure I look like a cool guy on the internet, well, that's 30% gone that you didn't put towards something that would actually fulfill your soul, man.
But imagine all the little dopamine hits you get from the IV of internal validation with every like button clicked.
And it's an addiction. And it's a tough one to break, you know. Like, I always recommend the book Deep Work by Cal Newport. Shout out to CT for showing me that. And he really goes into these like long periods of not checking your phone. And, you know, I'm not saying that I'm 100% on his schedule, you know what I mean? Like what he would do, but it's something I try to learn from and instill. And when I do find, oh, I've been looking at this thing for like 10 straight minutes, let me turn it upside down so I'm not looking at it for a while, you know, at least that. But really not an hour of deep work is like the goal of like, okay, check your phone real quick, 2 minutes, put it down for an hour. Don't pick it up every 2 minutes.
Right. Well, that's a tough one. I struggle with it for sure. It's especially in this time where social interaction is so limited,
Yep,
and we're
100%.
isolated, and it is even if it is the rhetoric of connection, there is still a deep need that gets, if not fulfilled, at least touched upon through that
It
compulsive
really does. You can
checking. You know?
curate it. You know what I mean? You can curate
Right.
your Instagram to be around people you actually care about connecting with and not see a whole bunch of bullshit if you
Yeah, I feel very
curate it
lucky
right.
in that because my network are a lot of very inspiring and creative people. There's also, of course, fodder amidst it. There's
Sure.
there's signal and there's noise, but for the most part, there's always something to gain from it, and it's also the imprint that shapes reality. But for that reason, also, it's good to I have kind of this ping pong back and forth between void and imagination, which is to say emptiness and form. So even to entertain the shaping of realities, it's always good to go with the ebb and the flow and to always return to that state of undefined, like unformed mind.
Meditation.
Yeah.
It's just, sitting in pure awareness. And sometimes that can be a very boring thing, but when you have enough spiritual inspiration by listening to the stories of these spiritual texts, or people who seem to have be exuding spiritual teachings, and then you can kind of look to them as an example of a way to be, or a way to kind of spend your time, at least. Like, you can find absolutely everything inside meditation, like everything you're looking for on the outside, through all the work and the money and the notoriety and all the stuff. You can find it all inside. It's crazy. It's such a funny conundrum. It's like
Yeah.
you're running around looking for it, and it's right under your nose.
Yeah. Like
But you got to
literally,
be
you
inspired.
said spiritual inspiration, and I immediately translated that as a respiration because that's really what it is, and it's under your nose. You breathe it in through your nose, you breathe it out through your nose, and you just sit with it, and you let things roll in and roll out on those tides. And it's really, it's coming back into that exchange rate of eternity and our pinpoint in time that does the real deep cleanse and the deep eternal return to
Yeah.
the center.
I love the breath, and have you seen, like, I think it's pronounced Thangka paintings?
Oh yeah.
Like, sometimes you'll see this kind of like air, like almost like it's a mystical airwave or cloud, like coming out of their nose. And
Always
it's,
with the little flaming spiral shapes, which
yes,
are like the fractal
yep,
shapes of Tao
exactly.
that manifest themselves through the elements.
Right. If
Yeah.
only we, understood like what's going on, just with our normal, just slight breathing through the nose, like the amount of elemental, interaction going on between our body and the atmosphere and everything going on, you would be stunned at how profound it is. But it's something that we totally just take for granted. That's why I love people who teach the breath. It's so easy, like Wim Hof, like,
Oh yeah,
or,
he became
certain
very popular.
yogis.
He's from my country.
Yeah, beautiful guy. And
Representing Netherlands, representing
yep, there you go.
the Tanka paintings. You know what I found funny about those? Because a friend
Yo,
of mine, he had a book of them, and he was really into. God, what was his deity's name? I forget the name of it, but it was this Yamantaka. He'd always be like, I have a Tibetan Buddhist practice, and I worship Yamantaka. And Yamantaka is this wrathful deity that
I've
kind
heard
of like
of
a
him.
Kali-like figure. I think it has like a pig-like face. And he
Yeah.
was showing me, the pictures of these Tanka paintings, and they always reminded me of these South Park cutout figures, but like really psychedelic South Park figures.
Totally.
And then I thought of the stained glass, because I was living in an old convent turned artist collective in San Francisco at the time. And we have this heart of the home was this chapel space with these stained glass windows. And when I look at the stained glass saints, I thought the same thing. Like, these look like back in those days that they made Tonka paintings and stained glass figurines, that these were intended to be animated, but they just didn't have the technology at the time. So they were just still images set in motion through devotion and through actual light shining through the stained glass.
Right.
But imagine that. Imagine if the Tonka
Was
art
animated.
became like a kind of psychedelic South Park, and like stained glass cathedrals would be set in motion, and you get this like real light shining through these transmogrifying glass images, which I think with augmented reality, this could easily become a reality. If anybody's listening that's into that kind of thing, let's brainstorm.
100%. You could always just do psychedelics in a church and maybe
It's true.
get a little taste of that.
Again, you're going right back to the inner resources there. I'm always thinking of like, how can we emulate those inner resources and project them outward so that we can show it to anybody, you know what I mean?
That would be the evolution of art,
Right.
I love that.
Yeah,
I love
absolutely.
that you're thinking of the evolution of where art can go, and I'm certain some people are out there working on it, you know what I mean? I was just talking with my friend about VR yesterday, about how we were on set and a guy had an 8K camera. I was already impressed by a 4K camera.
Wow,
This guy's
we're at
shooting
8K now.
8K. So I'm like, okay, that's crazy. And then after the shoot, we were back home talking, and I was like, so if 8K cameras are already on the market, how long is it going to be before video games, literally, this is the Elon Musk kind of, theory that
exceed the resolution of reality?
Yes, exactly. And then when that's gonna happen, I feel like it's going to for sure happen. And when it does, you can literally transport yourself to an emulation of any place in the world. Like, you could be sitting in your bedroom and be like, I want to see the sunset in Africa. And then boosh, you're literally in a simulation of what is exactly happening in a sunset in Africa. And it literally looks like you're there. Like, that is insane. But what's real crazy is, it will never replace the actual place.
Or will it? Or has it already?
I don't know.
The
Because
thing is, reality is still rendering. Like, we are actually at this is the newest now we've ever experienced. Everything has led up to this very moment.
Wow.
And that even applies to whoever's listening to it right now. Yeah, no, it's a really special thing that we've chosen to spend this pinnacle of the now conversing with each other about the pinnacle of the now. Ode to the now. And
Mr.
it's
Now.
And it's constantly catching up. And the funny thing is, we have these blind spots in the mind. For instance, our nose is actually in view, but we just edit that out because otherwise we're living in this nosy world. Like, we can't even see our own face, and it's been swapped out by this face-filled vision of the world around us.
Right.
But the biggest blind spot is that sense that we're living in a creation that was finished. Let's say, like, after a 6-day manic creation spree, and then maybe there was a 1-day crash period where the Lord had to take a moment's rest and then fell asleep, and then we're living in that half-finished dream where it is talking in its sleep, and we're transcribing the mumblings, these somniferous mumblings of the Lord, and continuing the ongoing creation, because
100%.
we've inherited an unfinished work, or so we think.
So I just, what you just said there kind of gave me a funny vision of simulation theory, which if we imagine it as, a coder creating a world with artificial or, in this case, authentic beings in it, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, before computers and video games and those experiences ever existed, how else could they possibly talk about it but with the language that they had then?
Right.
And you know what I mean? But it's actually this computer kind of like simulation thing happening. They were just trying to
Well,
understand.
that's I think a dangerous confabulation, because let me see if this makes sense.
Let's
It's
see.
kind of like if you look at a landscape and you say, that landscape reminds me of this painting by Van Gogh, when actually the painting reminds you of the landscape because it preceded it, right? Or
Right.
when you look at a clock, you think it represents time, where actually, well, that one's a little harder to get my head around. Let's just wrap that one, throw that one out the window. But what I'm trying to get at is that we've mined the mind for metaphors to better understand our interiority, and so we've come up with these technological metaphors that then reflect back at us what things are like. So to say that the computer coding is the actual language, I think, is dangerous, because we cast it back and we think that that's the primary reality, when that's actually just a parabol universe, is what I'd call it. It's not a parallel universe, but it's a parable of this world.
That's true.
And this kind of comes down to the idea of technosis that Eric Davis put forth, that all our technological innovations and inventions are actually upgrades from more ancient esoteric modalities. So I always like to relate that back to the, for instance, ayahuasca. I call it VR in the sense of vegetal reality. Because it's like you pointed out, just take psychedelics in the church and the thing will be animated. That's the original VR, right? VR is in fact, like in the ayahuasca case or any psychedelic case, you put on your intro spectacles, as I call them, and you enter into that zone. And when you think of the Shipibo shamans in Peru, the way they represent the technology with which to navigate inner space, which are the Icaros, the magic healing songs, or Icar OS, as I call it, to really emphasize the operating system quality of that vocal remote control. The way they represent them in their telas or tapestries are these embroidered circuitry, like these circuitous motherboard metaphors that precede the actual soldered circuit boards of our computer systems. So it speaks to an inner technology before we even had the outer technology to analog that. So what I'm thinking is happened probably hundreds of years ago is that this insight was vented outwards. And then that gave the idea for somebody to be like, hey, this kind of looks like these copper wires that we could solder together. And what if we, do that? And then all of a sudden you get the first binary circuit boards. Wow. I don't know. There's a lot of steps missing in that process. I'm obviously not very technically versed, but I take my poetic liberties.
Well, it's amazing how every innovation comes with the previous innovation needing to be in place. For example, like, you have to create that copper wire in order to create the next thing that follows it. But before someone does that, you can't have a vision of what follows it.
Right. And how much do we take for granted every day, the inventions that have created the comforts of our lives?
Exactly. Yeah, because it's like for you to have that brilliant music idea, someone had to have made the MacBook and Ableton and the charger and your whole situation before it allowed you to have the idea that you could even do this.
Ooh, I can riff off of that, because
Go
for
for it.
me, my own musical evolution, because I started out as a writer, and then I started out as a screenwriter, really. And then my screenplays, a lot of times, I wouldn't make them into movies because, I was in my teens when I started that, so I didn't have the resources. This is before all the DSLRs and the whole revolution of technology that now puts entire movie studios in our pocket. And so I would write these screenplays, but because they weren't being made, the language started becoming more prosaic. So then I started writing prose, but then the language started becoming more poetic and more musical, like almost like the written word was a chrysalis that wanted to break free, like the life force wanted to animate itself off of the dead symbols on the page. So then from that, there was a musicality that wanted to be born into the world. And I played the didgeridoo, which is an interesting wind instrument, which has its own dreamtime mythologies tied to that, a kind of like pipeline to the other side in the Aboriginal lore.
Oh, I didn't know that. I love the instrument.
really?
I didn't know the kind of history about maybe spiritual significance of it.
Yeah, so the didgeridoo, it's the oldest wind instrument in the world, and it's made from a termite. Traditionally, it's made from a termite hollowed log of eucalyptus tree. Mine is actually a agave tube, which is a very thin membrane, which creates a really nice resonant sound. And then speaking of breathing, it's powered by the kind of pranic piston that you become when you learn to circular breathe. So you're breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth at the same time by creating a separate reservoir in the lungs and belly and the cheeks. The cheeks create a kind of secondary pump. So you release air into the mouth and you breathe that out as you breathe in new air into the lungs. So you create this very hypnotic kind of circuit once you get into the trance with it. And the sounds themselves are like this vibratory expanse, like these
I love them.
Porous coral caves. And sometimes you can shape them into these little Dreamtime warriors, or in the Aboriginal lore, they would play them as storytellers. So you'd get these like sounds, which is like, this is the kangaroo, and the kangaroo came out of the dream time and did this thing. And they tell their stories like that. And that's how the world was created, through this kind of roar of the sound that created these shapes, and the shapes settle into this world as we know it, which is imbued with the vibratory, ancestral, mythic resonance of the Dreamtime. The Shipibo also have a similar notion that the world was created through song, but in their case, it was a giant anaconda named Ronin, or Ronin, which is also the Japanese word for samurai, but that's neither here nor there. And Ronin's patterns on its scales also being a musical word, are the kana, the patterns of circuitry that are representative of the songs of the shaman. So it's almost like when the shaman chants these songs, he is singing the scales off of the hide of Ronin that created the world, that dreamt the world into being.
And it would create, even beauty to people that had no idea what was actually going on. Like, he was doing this, what you just said, and yet to other people, they're just hearing beautiful sounds, and they say, keep doing that. Keep doing that. Yeah. We like it. We love it,
And it touches onto our inner circuitry, unwittingly even, because it aligns with that, because it speaks from and to that. Right. But where I was going with this is that was kind of like my musical foundation.
Love it.
And then I had an experience where, well, first of all, my friend Aslan, when I saw him perform his music, he was playing guitar and singing, and then he would have these moments where he would vocalize, for instance, string arrangements, just with, or what would be a string arrangement. And I saw this and I was like, wow, that's so interesting. Like, you don't need to have the instruments. You can emulate the instruments like that. And a couple of years before, Medulla had come out, Bjork's entirely vocally based album.
Oh, love that one.
And that got me interested in learning to beatbox, because I always had a knack for making strange sounds.
Same, bro.
And then I went to the desert and had a number of kind of ritualistically induced mystical experiences, where the world itself, the desert world, which was visually beheld as a visual composition, all of a sudden became unmuted and was beheld as a vibrational, musical, syntactical experience, where the soundscape was delivered to me through what I called metronomes. And it was just a name that I coined for these tangible frequencies that delivered the sound of the environment to me. But when I unpacked that later, I thought metronomes, gnomes with a G, metro genomes. And a genome is the pocket of information in the genes that signify a particular kind of being. For instance, there's a genome for a monkey, there's a genome for a plant, there's a genome for a human. And
Yep.
so what the metro means measure. So these guardians of the measure and the secrets of the treasure of all of existence were delivering pockets of information from different loci in the land, in the same way that the Aboriginals have this concept of the dreamtime song lines, where the landscape has these kind of like landmines almost that detonate with song and description through which to navigate the land of the ancestors. And so I was tangibly experiencing this, and the desert sounded like this, like,
Wow. Yeah.
and I
Music.
started hearing that, and then I started hearing, all I want is water, the desert feed me dreams, it fed me phantom rivers and its memories of streams. And then I realized I was singing that. I had become a mouthpiece for the desert. Like my body had been informed by these pockets of information delivered by these intangible beings that I called metronomes.
Yeah.
And I was now a mouthpiece for the desert, which had eons of sunshine to transmit, but had never had anybody to talk to or talk through.
Yep.
And from that, I created a project called Thea Terra, which is translated, it's Thea is goddess. It's also my mother's name. And then Terra is earth. But then it's also Theater Ra, like the sun god. So it's the idea that the earth is this living being spotlit by the sun that is this kind of stage in which our lives play out.
Mm-hmm.
And I started making music purely vocally, because this whole rant started when you were saying, like, without the technology and these instruments, we didn't have this. But I kind of went back to the beginnings of music, which is just the body, the music of the body and the voice and beating on things, and I started making music like that. And then later I started translating that to different instruments with the help of various musicians. But my roots are really in that the kind of indigenous ingenuity of just vocalizations and vocal rhythms and harmonies. Not unlike our friend Morgan Sorn, who, when I met him, he had a very similar...
Yes.
And we talked about that when he was my guest on Self-Portraits as Other People, this sense of the landscape speaking and singing, and you becoming a mouthpiece for that.
Communing with nature, you know? It's like I'm not going to say the highest as in some better form, but it is
It's the most natural.
Yeah, there you go. We're just getting more natural. We're getting away from all the unnaturalness. That's it. I love it. Yeah, that is why I love music, and I've explained that a bunch, so I'm repeating myself for, people that have heard several of my podcasts, but, after everything left me in this psychedelic spiritual awakening I had, the one thing that I could observe was this music that was apparent, the beauty of sound. It was like I was hearing the universe, and you hear that universe means like one song.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And that's why I was like, okay, music's why I'm here. You know what I mean? It's like, that's what I got to do. There's no other thing, you think about what would bring you joy, right? It's like, does being a banker bring me joy? Nope. And check that off. Does being so-and-so, run down the list of things you ever thought you'd be until you find the thing that brings you joy. And that was music. And, music it's a tough one to maybe monetize to the point that it's all you do for money, but it is the most rewarding.
It gives back so much.
Spiritual practice.
Yeah, like when you write something, the word dies down on the page, but with music, every note you play fuels your being. Like, it feeds back. Like, that's why I call it feedback, right? There's a feedback loop and a positive reinforcement that continues. And I think
it's shareable.
Yeah, exactly. And I think everybody has it in them, just like I think anybody can paint, but it's always a matter of finding your own voice in whatever way. Because if you say I can't paint or I can't sing, it's just because you're comparing what you think song or painting is to somebody else's expression.
Yep.
And the scary thing is, of course, going into the unknown and listening to yourself as you do something and don't know where it's going to go. So I've definitely dedicated my life to allowing the channel to get ahead of its meaning, so that
That's
I
it.
trust it now that things can come out and I can listen to what's happening, and I can either agree or not agree, or redact myself and be like, I didn't mean to say that. That didn't sound right, or but it's that feeling. It's following that river.
That's why I think, psychedelics are very great tools when used properly to
Hmm.
show you what you're capable of if you get out of your own way, meaning that nagging thought that says you can't do it, you're not good enough, hit that note, or you messed up the timing on your drum, or whatever it is gone. And
Hmm.
you're just in the ritual of the improvisational performance of what your soul wants to sing,
Yeah.
what your soul wants to play. Like so many of the reasons I think people probably quit music, for example, is because there's this like sense of, this technical skill thing, or
Hmm.
like this, like maybe the ability to be able to record their music to their liking, where it sounds like the music they think sounds good, because that's a tough thing. It takes
Hmm.
mastering and
Yeah.
engineering and equipment and all this crazy stuff to sound like the music you think sounds good. But like, because they are not able to produce, they'll just quit instead of let the soul keep singing, man. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And what you're saying about psychedelics is that it creates a bypass, because it takes away the thing that gets in the way, which is our inhibition, that
Yeah.
false sense of identity that we limit ourselves with, the analytical interface. And that's why often it feels like something is coming through, or you're channeling something. It's just because you're allowing the body to speak freely, to
Hmm.
express itself freely. And in the right setting, like you were saying, like
Yeah.
if you do it appropriately. So it's all about creating the container with people you
Right.
trust and an environment that is conducive to it, where you
100%.
allow this kind of boundless openness to
That's it.
contain and resound,
Yes. This is a
literally resound.
private, intimate thing. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? You're not supposed to be taking psychedelics to the point, I'm not going to say you don't microdose, because microdosing is very interesting and helps a lot of people, and you can go function in the world. But what I want to say is, if you're going to have a ceremonial dose of psychedelics, this is a private and intimate thing. You need to be alone and comfortable with being yourself.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe not alone because maybe you have a friend, but when your friend is such a good friend, you may as well be alone, because you're going to go through exactly what you need to go through, and they're going to understand,
Hmm.
you know? So like, like maybe people can't unlock to this musicality or this flow or this rhythm that could actually be very helpful to them in creating art that will help satisfy their soul, because they're not in the proper containers when these modes unlock. Like, you might get into the place to want to chant, but you're standing in line at the store, and you shouldn't, and you shouldn't, and it's probably going to induce all this anxiety. And you're like, I'm having crazy thoughts, dude. Like, they're telling me to chant, but
Hmm.
instead, if you were in the proper spiritual container where it's like, hey, allow things to come up, and then you start maybe chanting or whatever, you're like, oh, I can do it. This whole time I thought I couldn't do it. What the heck?
When you say chanting too, I'm thinking like mantras, which are repetitive, and it's almost like a tuning ritual, or a loosening up of the vocal cords and of the
Hmm.
vibrational qualities of the voice, to
Right.
come into that space where all the dust has been kind of trembled off the speakers, and it can find better expression. And
Hmm.
what I hear you speaking to is the language of the soul, and the various obstructions to that, like you mentioned, things like
Hmm.
banking, or these institutions, or standing in line for things, like these kind of
Yeah.
structured, concrete minded apparitions that have, like I mentioned, like been extracted from the soil, and they
Hmm.
they stand there as a metaphor for what is within, but they also can become eclipsing factors to the
Hmm.
within, right?
Hmm.
And then also our language, like we're using now, the word is something that can displace us from the body, especially the written word, because it doesn't have the vibrational quality, the animal quality with which we express. And so I'm always very interested in finding natural languages, music, of course, being the most soulful or spiritual, if you can call it that, because it is, it can be heavenly or it can be hellish. It can just like embody spaces and times and other realms.
So powerful. Imagine, because loud volume music,
Yeah.
like it brings to mind this joke we used to play on my friend where we get this really creepy Aphex Twin song called Radiator. I don't know if you've heard it,
It's
but it's like, yep,
yeah.
that's the one. And we would
I love
just
that album.
blast
The
it
ambient
like
works.
loud when he would come home, like from school or something. And we would shut all the lights and shut all the curtains and make it pitch black and just blast it. It's like you literally can't function and you're like disoriented. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
music itself can set this whole emotion, like
It's air
especially loud
conditioning.
music.
It's pure air conditioning, especially like that album you're mentioning, the ambient works, or another one that comes to mind is Coil, music to listen to in the
Oh
dark,
yeah, love it.
volume 2. You know it?
I
Yeah.
know it.
Or their Time Machines is another album where
Hmm.
you get like these 25-minute tracks that are just like frequencies shifting ever so subtly. Like if you turn that on, you just feel it. It
Yep.
conditions a mood that you can move through, and that's, I think, a very potent way to design experience in a
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah, you can really control a whole mood, and that's why a good music playlist, go check out timewheel.net, is, really helpful for these containers. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because it can bring that uplifting vibe even when you maybe feel anxious or whatever it is, But I guess just kind of getting back to it's so interesting how music is something you can take with you too. Like you can remember these drum patterns and hit your legs and make drums. You can remember these melodies and bring them through your voice. You can
Mhm.
bring music anywhere once you learn it.
Yeah.
It's
And even
incredible.
words, if you can find kind of like the lyrical cadence or
Yep.
you start to focus on the sounds of consonants, because even
Hmm.
that is the basis of beatbox, right?
Yeah.
All
Yep.
these S's, K's, P's,
Yeah.
T's, all of it.
Maybe that's why this is maybe, you said earlier, a very, if not the most spiritual kind of transmission is that, you can certainly paint these things, but you need a paint brush and canvas versus
Well, I mean, I think the equivalent to it would be that
we're an
you
instrument.
can smear mud on a wall and you can paint with that.
Yeah,
If that's the visual equivalent of it, like you don't need the tools. You can use anything in your surroundings to
that's
create
true.
with.
That's true.
Another thing I wanted to touch on to, because you had mentioned universe being one song
Yep.
or one poem, this kind of thing. The idea of music and sound is that sound is like the great connecting factor, right? Like if the universe is one big ohm or one big sound wave in which there are these little isolated sound waves
Hmm.
or frequencies or wavelengths, if you'd call it that, um, it's the unifying factor, while at the same time, to bring it back to the persona, the mouth with the megaphone, it's also what separates us. Because, for instance, right now the sound is coming from my persona and it's reaching your persona, and then when you speak, there's the identification of Matt
Hmm.
speaking back this way.
Hmm.
And so it's that beautiful kind of paradoxical, it's the connecting factor and it's the separating factor of what I call the ventriloquist source,
Mm.
which there was a meme recently that kind of, in a very cute way, illustrated that, where there's this character and it says the universe, and then he's got his fingers sticking out from above this water line, and
Hmm.
then each of the fingers is its own little character,
Hmm.
so that the kind of like the way that light refracts through a prism, all of a sudden there's this spectrum of differentiation where
Hmm.
what was one thing, light, is now all of a sudden a spectrum of color.
Yes.
I
Wow.
wanted to say too about the with natural languages. Like I'm very drawn to these kind of abstract elemental languages, like the calligraphy of clouds or the drifting alphabets, if you can call them that. They look like
Hmm.
Sanskrit, like that drift in the tide, or
Yep.
the kind of almost Arab-esque quality of a termite's carvings in the wood. And you actually had a song recently called Cloud Shape. What was it called?
Cloud-like.
Cloud Like. which I loved, and I got that image in mind of this kind of cloud form drifting along, and then with each kind of distorted drum hit or bass hit or whatever the sound was, I would see it kind of glitch into this prismatic aberration, and as it was drifting, it was taking on different forms, and it was like this very cool cloud parade that was coming forth from the sound that you had crafted.
Thank you. Yeah, no, absolutely. That is, pretty accurate, because I think a lot of what I draw from tone wise is the feelings that I get in these kind of beautified mystical states. It really, because I'm sure, so many people create for so many different reasons. It's all a different thing to each person. Some people want to create sounds that are just, death metal sounds. They just want, like straight rage or whatever it is. But, for me, I'm really inspired by, like I'm awestruck to the point that I'm inspired to try to encapsulate an experience through song, and that's kind of why I began making music. Is it's my own little like time capsule of these experiences,
Yeah.
and some of them aren't always psychedelic. Every song is psychedelic, but the tones that call to me. Go ahead.
Yeah. What's funny is the death metal example. I always think of that because I'm not drawn to that sound, but what often happens is when you transpose that to like an acoustic setting, it's very beautifully and technically composed music. Like if
Oh
you
yeah,
listen to like a metal song as heavy wood, let's say, just acoustic instruments,
sure.
it's almost like this minstrel-like
Tribal.
quality or this tribal, medieval
Yeah,
influence. But it's
I've
just,
got that. I've got that.
yeah,
I've got that. Absolutely. It's like the band Meshuggah.
right there.
I love, I'm not I don't love the lyrics. They're kind of doom and gloom for me, but the freaking sounds and the rhythms I carry with me.
Yeah.
After I hear them, they're stuck in my head for days. It's like,
Are they
it's like,
Norwegian or Danish?
I don't know. I
I think
don't know.
they're from one of those places. They're definitely a Scandinavian ensemble.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, just the rhythms they introduce in these weird kind of like, I'm not good at talking about the different, meters and stuff, like
I'm not
five
either. I've
five and
never been able to figure that.
blah, like some of my friends are good at that, so
Yeah.
I'll let them be good at it. But like just I can remember the rhythm though, even though it's so complex and I have no idea how to count it or anything. I can tap it out along with it, and I will totally carry those things. And like you said, it's that there are. It does sound a certain way because of the detuned guitars and all that distortion and stuff. But like if you were to just translate it to all drums and like wooden, like what are those things called? Like
Xylophones or
yeah,
something. Yeah.
xylophone, exactly. Like it would be like this tribal, like shamanic,
Yeah.
kind of experience.
Yeah, it's deep digging. Like if you look at, well, I'm not going to get into that, but there's a lot of bands that have that sort of sound, and it's just like a forceful deep dig right to the center of the Tootsie Roll, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And
100%.
I had another thought that just came to mind, but then it slipped away. Oh yeah, you mentioned how you can memorize the rhythm or how you can take that with you, and kind of my work in its various facets. It's geared towards, this is my tagline, right? That I always say at the beginning of my podcast, for instance. It's where the limits of language meet the fringes of reality. And I
Mm-hmm.
had a song lyric that was the opening of a song, and it sounds like an invocation, and almost like a regal proclamation. And it goes, "Give us language to express the timing of the endlessness. Give us language to impress our forms upon the emptiness."
Mm-hmm. That's it. That's it. That's the whole purpose.
Right?
That's what I was saying. That's how we get back to the beginning of talking about why we're here. That's
Exactly.
and we all have our own forms of channeling that. It's some through it's cooking, some it's branding, some it's tech coding and video game creation, and for some it's music, and for some it's poetry. It's like, but just it's I don't know. Maybe this isn't a message for everyone. I feel like it is, but I guess what I'm trying to say is everyone is a creative entrepreneur. You don't have to go do the bank. You don't have to go do the checkout at Walmart. Maybe you do to
Well, it's
get to where you
even
think you
something
need.
like banking, which we tend to think of as a kind of a demonic art or something like that, right? Because it seems so far removed from everything.
Sure.
Like the Dow Jones is not that far removed from the Tao Te, from the way of virtue. It's still, we're talking about fluctuating currencies
Mhm.
and betting on those and watching their behaviors, and the economy, in the same sense as the ecology, is kind of what lords over the tides. Like the modern world is lorded by a kind of Vishnu-like Wall Street ensemble, many armed Wall Street ensemble, pulling strings and buying and selling, and that creates the ebb and flow of the world of human artifice. Just
Mhm.
like in the same way, the natural world is lorded over by a different kind of Tao that similarly ebbs and flows. And if you pay attention to that one, then you can also, you know,
Yeah.
tune into different spirals that will, different vortices and whirlpools that will increase in magnitude, and others that will fizzle out. And, you learn through trial and error, I guess.
Yeah.
I was going to ask
So
you too about, because
go ahead.
on the subject of sound, I listened to one of your episodes and you had this really cool synth swell
Mm.
intro that I really enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about the conceptual kind of intro there. So this is interesting to get to explain, because what I envision is it's almost inspired by it's essentially the DMT experience where
Mm.
you kind of get to go into this like geometrical astral plane where all of time is accessible,
Mhm.
and time is completed already, and it's like you're in an archive of everything that's happened, and then you get to zoom in to the conversation happening between the two people. In this case it'd be you and me,
Mhm.
so you blast off into the Xian archive, which is this kind of etheric astral space where this kind of guide comes and greets you. It's almost like what happens in DMT, and then says, "What do you want to hear? Oh, you want Michelangelo and Matt? All right, let me load that up for you." And then it's almost as if they're zooming in back into the sliver of space and
Mhm.
time where this conversation happens. That's kind of the
Cool.
concept.
I like that. Well, I think it's a good seduction into an episode, because I wanted to check out an episode before I came on, so I turned it on, and it just has like a nice kind of come on,
Hmm.
like a rise and like an invitation, and then there's the little bleep bloop howl,
Yeah.
female howl voice that comes in. Welcome to Xeon Archives, and then we're in the conversation.
Right.
Which also, it's funny because you said Hal, which is of course a 2001 reference.
Hmm.
We were going to touch on to maybe these monoliths that have been popping
Yeah.
up left and right.
Yeah. What do you think they are? They're
Collect
freaking
the whole
awesome.
set. I
Because I
think I think it's funny because there were just like four more that popped up, like one in
Right.
Holland and Colombia, and I think a couple more places.
Hmm.
So I started calling it a polylith, because we can't really call it a monolith anymore if it's not just one.
Yeah.
But I think it's funny because it's a phenomenon that, in itself is, in my eyes, quite clearly man-made or
Yeah.
staged,
Yeah.
but it opens up uh, conversations, let's say,
Yep.
and it's kind of like it sends out, even though it's like an inanimate object without any technology inside of it, it sends out a signal of disruption in the daily flow of things, in the same way that a crop circle would, where it just
Right.
kind of makes you stop to go like, what is this? What is it about? Like, who's doing this? Why are they doing this? Why now at the end of 2020, which is already such a plot twisted year?
Right.
And then I think it reminds me of Banana Gate, which is a name I just gave it. But I don't know if you remember last year at Art Basel, there was somebody that had taped a banana to the
Mhm.
wall,
No, I didn't.
and it sold for, I think, $200,000.
my gosh, that's funny.
And a lot of people were, of course, pissed off and sharing it. They're like, this isn't art. And I'm like, why are you spending your energy and time like sharing it if it's
Yeah.
not art? And it was really, and then I saw all these memes popping up about it. And then there was like a guy dressed in a banana suit taped to the wall. You know, it became like this kind of ridiculous,
Oh my.
this focal point that radiated outward into
Yep.
memeing for meaning kind of fractal offshoots and conversations. And I feel
Yeah.
the same way about these monoliths. They're these points of focus that radiate outwards into this kind of matrix of conversation and emulation. Like I've created a couple of meme-like
That's
things
awesome.
from it, and just
They're great.
it's just it's a stupid, in a way it's a stupid thing. Like I look at it and I'm just like, this is so stupid. It's so meaningless, but I love making meaning of it, or creating, just like,
Yeah.
you know, the original monolith in the
Right.
movie is this big iPhone that let's face it, it's a big iPhone that shows up in the middle of nowhere, and everybody that comes in contact with it just trips out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wonder why for me it felt, because my opinion changed, which was initially it felt like something actually kind of mystical.
Mm-hmm.
And then as more and more popped up, I started to think the first one was real, but the following ones were people that were influenced by the first one.
Right, I was thinking about that too, like that they're a reaction
Yes,
to
there is.
that
The
yeah.
following ones are a reaction. Could the first one actually be real? I don't know. But then I started to think it could just be a performance art piece by, let's say, Banksy. You know, it's
Right.
like I got all the money in the world. Let me go build some fucking pyramids, or not pyramids,
Yeah.
mirror monoliths.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's going to cost me 50 grand, but we're going to get a kick out of it, you know, or whatever it is.
There was an article, I just shared it with Jen Sodini, about this artist. I forget his first name. His last name was McCracken,
Hmm.
who passed away, but he used to make objects like this. And, you know, he was a big believer in extraterrestrial life and mystical experiences and things like that. And he had, in his lifetime, talked about wanting to spread these things in different random places, just hiding them. So
Hmm.
there is a good chance that the first one, at least, was one of his that he
Yeah.
placed there, and it had been there for a long time. I think Google Maps even showed that it had been there for years. So it's very
And no one
possible that
knew.
he did that.
That's why I feel authentic about it, you know?
What's that?
And if no one knew and it's been
Right.
there for several years, that's why I feel like that one is an authentic, real, a real wonder, you
Well,
know? Like,
the wonder is that it was discovered now of all times, right? In this,
true.
and you know, we had the 2012 fiasco where we, you know, December 21st, 2012 is like the big paradigm shift is coming in, and we're shifting into a higher level of awareness, or whatever that story
Mhm.
was. And then that didn't quite go down the way we thought, and now they're like, actually we got the date wrong. Classic, like prophetic apologist statement.
Mhm. Mhm.
So now it's been transposed to December 21st, 2020, when there's a big planetary do-si-do going on in
I
the
didn't know
sky.
that.
You didn't know that?
No, I didn't know
I,
that there's
I don't know
things
the specifics, but
now.
there's a bunch of planets are supposed to also get in line. They have to wait in line to get front row seats to the revelation, or the apocalypse, or the
That's funny. Well,
epoch
we'll see.
elapse.
We'll see. Yeah, my initial thoughts on 2012 is I pondered it in an altered state, many years after 2012, and I felt like what I came to was something did happen, because if you look at the things that we consider normal now, before 2012 were completely not normal, like Uber and all this and that, you know what I mean?
Right.
All these great, like, iPhones and Instagram and blah, 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 all this stuff, like, these are now normal. We're in a new world. We truly are. If you were to fast forward and like, drop ourselves back into 2011, we'd be like, "Where's all the stuff that I'm used to?"
I
Like,
agree.
this is completely,
But
like,
it
this is
started
unbearable.
before then, even, like, I think, well, speaking of monoliths and iPhones, like when the first iPhones started coming out is when the big Apple revolution, when the Apple was first bitten, let's say, and the new technology started flooding the world. Was before that time even, but definitely like leading up to 2012 too. Like my interpretation of this prophecy was what would create the shift is if media would change and if the media would come into our hands, and that's
Mm,
kind of when YouTube all of a sudden and that whole revolution of this
very
kind of
true.
Democratized creation
Well, that's what
sprung
I
up.
mean to
So
say too, is if we go back to 2011, how much less information that we have access to.
yes,
Like even through YouTube, even though YouTube was a thing, it only had a certain amount of videos. Now we can
yeah,
find even so much more information. So while the shift wasn't overnight kaboom, if we really think about it in this span of 2012 to now, we're in a different world. You know what I mean?
I agree.
So that's the way I think of 2012. But as far as that's a very interesting to me, I definitely am intrigued to learn more about uh, it actually being postponed till now or something. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's just the new wave of it. Somebody's always going to step in and find some alignment in the heavens that's supposed to create like a really intense energy on December 21st. That's, of course,
Mm.
somebody will liken it akin to a DMT state, and if you're not prepared for it, you're going to have a really trippy, twisted time.
Sure.
And if you've done your breath work beforehand, you
Mhm.
might be able to brace the rowdy rapids and row
Right.
past the Isle of the Sirens.
That's funny. Let's entertain this thought of what would happen if some spiritual, like dimension shift. How would it happen? How would it go about if we get creative with it for this little like theoretical movie?
Well,
Like
I feel like the whole COVID thing already did that. Like,
let's see.
it's funny because your platform is called Time Wheel, and I thought of the little COVID symbol as a kind of, I described it in one of my podcasts as a time wheel or a prayer wheel that's just
Mm,
parading through the streets, and people are running from it, and some of them get trampled by it, and some of them get touched by it and become initiates, almost like a video game, like whoop, and then they're crowned.
Yeah.
They've got the antibodies. They are now like part of that, and that is called a corona, which is like the crown, like the Christ. Um,
Yeah.
Jesus H. Chronos was a term I coined because we talk about the year 2020 has counted since the year of our Lord.
Yeah.
So, and then I was thinking Jesus H. Corona, that this is like the new Messiah that's coming
Yeah,
around.
that's
So I
what I was
feel,
gonna say is this will trigger people, but what if Corona is something we're supposed to get?
yeah. Well, even if you don't get it, it still has influenced everybody one way or another.
True. True. True.
So I feel like even I don't know what's waiting for us on December 21st. I'm not putting too much stock into it
Right.
to give it a
I guess
marketplace metaphor, but at the
I'll
same time, this
yeah,
whole year has already been a kind of initiation and examination of how
right.
systems are organized and how they're failing and what's important and where to place our focus.
Amazing. Yep. I guess I will give my quick go at how like a spiritual, revelations, that the last part of the Bible would go down, which is something like all the things that have consciousness, it becomes now clear to everyone. And the trees are openly communicating with you. The rocks are openly just shining their consciousness to you, and the even the animals appear in their pure majestic spirit forms, to the point that everyone has woken up to the fact that it's all alive and we shouldn't be killing any of it.
Hmm. The revival of animism.
Yes, animism returns. That's my
To
new
speak
movie.
to that, a quick plug for my Patreon. I put an essay on there a little while ago, an illustrated essay called "Grotesque Gods,"
Yeah.
which has a lot of my kind of pareidolik artwork, which has a lot of trees and palm trees and just natural organic forms with faces that I've embellished that I
Mm,
saw in there, and then I just like touched them up so that they're more personified. But
right.
it's maybe that's my part in your vision is to kind of bring the to speak for the trees like a good Lorax, to give them their face, to unmask the seemingly inanimates and give them a voice as
Right.
the metronomes would have wanted it.
Right. Well, when you find yourself in that state, I feel like, Michael Phillip, had said on my podcast with him that he's been reevaluating this idea, and that in turn has helped me to maybe put more mental power into thinking of this idea or rethinking of this idea, but that everyone would get it. You know what I mean? But maybe everyone can't get it.
Would get it? What is the it that they're getting?
Like the divine nature that everything is, like the way I just said, the trees would be in their full form and apparent to you as a being
Mm-hmm.
that's making all of the air that you breathe and doing everything for us, and yet we never see them, and like the fact that all these animals have souls and they're a little person in there, dude, and yet we'll kill them and eat them. It's crazy. If everyone saw what psychedelics show you, which is this kind of unhuman data, it's like, here's what it is without you like thinking that you're apart from it. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
There's a
what?
great Jack
Yeah.
Handy quote. Do you remember Jack Handy? He was like on Saturday Night Live. Deep Thoughts by Jack Handy. He
I've
has
seen it
he
once.
has one that's so good and it's so appropriate to this. He says, maybe if trees could scream, we wouldn't be so cavalier in cutting them down. Unless, of course, they'd scream all the time for no good reason. God, that guy was such a gem.
That's a good
I'm
one.
trying to look up this other thing here so that I can quote myself, but the idea of, you said animals, they're like a little person in there.
Yeah.
Because we have this sense of different species, right?
Yeah.
And we have a sense of, for humans, that we're special
Right.
and that animals are not special. But the thing is, the word is actually special. And when we think of an animal, if you see, for instance, a fox, that's any fox. That fox could be any fox, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then if you see a person, for instance, here it is. I'm going to read it to you.
Yeah.
It goes, the word special, which you'd instinctively pronounce special, is actually pronounced special as it relates to the word species. Were you to venture into the wilderness and encounter a fox, you'd say, look it, a fox. And it could have been any fox, for all foxes are special and equal in their specialness. Each fox represents the entire species. Each fox is every fox, nothing special. But were you to venture into the not-so-wilderness and encounter, for example, Dan Aykroyd, you'd say, look it, Dan Aykroyd, and not, look it, a human. Because although Dan Aykroyd is a member of the human species, he is in himself unique and special, by which I mean to imply that he is like a species unto himself. As are you, as are we all. Oh,
Right.
so special, aren't we, we stylized animals?
Yep. That's it. That's what I'm trying to say. That's exactly. It's like we would see the specialness in even every tree, every animal, every insect, every person, and we would not be fighting and killing and arguing. You know what I mean? We would put effort towards love if we only knew that everything is as special as we think we are, you know?
Right, and at the same time, the animals also eat each other left and right. But I think that the key distinction there is, not to eat more than you need, and of course, the
Sure.
circumstances in which we've kind of industrialized the holocaust of cows and chickens and things like that. It's funny when we think of like humane forms of slaughter is already such an oxymoron, but I think you
Right.
get what I'm kind of aiming at. Just the
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
a more a
animals,
natural balance. We've lost the balance, and
yeah, while they are, special in each of them, humans have the gift of intellect. We should be even more evolved than the animals eating each other.
But yeah, that's also just a mask we wear, right? The idea that because we're talking animals and because we're dreaming animals, we somehow have more right to live and to dominate other beings, which I think is, like you said, just because we have these higher faculties,
Mm-hmm.
in quotes, doesn't necessarily mean that we're wiser, in the way we go about things.
Potential, though. We have the potential.
We've got so much potential.
You know, each animal, it being its own kind of person, us being our own type of person, I think we would be able to have a greater effort towards sustaining life, and yet we're the ones destroying the ecosystems and
Right.
stuff. It's crazy, the game they sold us, bro. It's not the right game.
We got to get to know the animals better, because if you think about it, like I have a cat and I know it. That's a little person, like you said. When it's your pet, you know it very much. But the chicken I ate yesterday, that's just that's chicken. It's labeled chicken.
Right. We don't know it as Freddy the Third,
Yeah, and it reminds me of
Freddy
this
the Third.
meme about this couple that finds a spider, and she says, "Don't kill it," she says, "take it out." So I went and had some drinks with it. Real nice guy, wants to be a web designer. Which, of course, we were raised. We're talking animals, like I mentioned. We're raised by cartoons of talking animals, so we have a very twisted and almost like cartoony perception of personhood, and when it comes to animals as well. So, like the silly example I just gave, it's kind of the way we tend to look at it, in a way of like getting to know, like the animal is its own little person. It's got its dreams and aspirations and ambitions and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was doing that as well recently, where I was kind of putting my mental daily onto my dog,
Right.
and it's not the same.
Mhm.
They don't and it's honestly pretty beautiful how simple that it is for them, because they don't have this like big goal to achieve. They're kind of just hanging
They
out.
want to eat. They want some
Yeah,
attention, some affection, and they
yeah,
want to run around freely, maybe chase a squirrel.
totally.
I think also of
You learn from that.
Grizzly Man, the Werner Herzog,
Yep.
where there's the scene where Timothy Treadwell is just so, it was like I just looked in its eyes and I just saw so much love. And then Herzog comes in. He's like, "Here I differ with Treadwell. I look in this bear's eyes and I see only the cold indifference of nature." Like it's the kid is projecting
Right.
humanity into the animal, when
Right.
actually the animal's looking at him and he's like, "Maybe I'll eat you later.
Yep.
Not right now. I already had some salmon." And he's looking at him and he's like, "Oh, he's so pretty, so lovely. He likes me." And the animal's just like, "I'll probably eat him in his tent later," whatever it might be.
I
That's
know.
why
All right.
that movie is so great. Just the
It
tension
is.
between those two perspectives. Like, of course, the most famous scene in there is when, speaking of foxes, there's like the little foxes that were his friends, and he
Mhm.
finds them mauled, and he's crying, and he's like, "I don't understand. How can it be so cruel?" And,
Mhm.
like nature is supposed to be harmony. And then again, Herzog comes in with the exact opposite, with the classic lines. "Here again, I differ with Treadwell. Whereas he sees the world as kind and harmonic, I see the common denominator as chaos, hostility, and murder."
It's true. It's
It's
there's
the
a
truth
time
is
and a
somewhere
place.
in between. You know what
Yes,
I mean?
there's a time and a place for both. You might catch the bear in a particularly friendly moment, because yeah, sometimes dogs are very protective and
Hmm.
standoffish, and sometimes they're very friendly. Yeah, I think
They're very very
bears
loyal too.
have a
Yeah,
friendly moment, but
yeah.
that's not its
It's
baseline.
nature. Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
it's
how much longer do we have? See if I can get into.
15 minutes.
Okay, so I'll tell you a little psychedelic tale
Yeah.
that gave me an insight into exactly what we're talking about and what you just said about humans are like, we have this intellect and we have this so much potential, you said, right?
Yeah.
So I was by the river, um, with my friend LSD on the mind,
Uh-huh.
and the entire riverbank. It was nighttime. Full moon was blasting and frosting the landscape with cold silver light, and all the wet rocks along the river were like perfectly sculpted psychic sculptures, like Rodin's garden or like Sukalski sculptures. Or
Yep.
I saw all these influences of these dark, like Geiger-esque things. And I imagine if I were a sculptor and I'd look at a rock, that's exactly what I would see. I would see the potential that it could be
Right.
shaped into. And it started to show me the garden of my own psyche. And what
Yep.
I saw was basically the river was the river of time, and it was this indifferent stream that just rushed along. And it was very much like we talked about earlier, the Tao, as in the stock market, but also like the Tao, as in the way, the ineffable way of nature. And I noticed how all the little swells and eddies and vortices on the surface were these portals of potential. And sometimes they would grow, and you could bet on that, and your investment would grow. And sometimes you'd bet on the wrong one, and it would fizzle out.
Mm-hmm.
And the stakes were high. It was life and death. And there were these rocks alongside the river on one side, and one of them looked like unicorn rubble, and the one next to it were like cyborg bits. And then there was like a T-Rex skeleton also. So there's dinosaur rubble. And to me, like interpreting this later, these were my fears, of the future, of where the stream of life was going. There was traces of extinction, just as we propel ourselves towards our extinction potentially on fossil fuels. The very bones and liquidated remains of the dinosaurs fueling us towards that impending doom. And then that was the dinosaur rubble. And then the unicorn bits was just fantasy had been abolished.
Right.
There was no more fantasy. This was like stark truth, bare boned. And then the cyborg bits, that was just like some transhumanist future on the horizon, which is something that often comes up for me in lysergic mind states.
Yes.
But then I noticed in the midst of the river, there was like this little drop, this little like waterfall point with these rocks in there. And these rocks were perfectly formed in the shape of a family. There was this, at the center of it, this knight, like his scaled armor was glinting in the moonlight with the wetness of the water, and he had his arm extended up like the Statue of Liberty, and he was holding on in the stream as his woman, this maiden, was clinging to him, and she was touching his face, and she was going shh, shh. She was comforting him as he like stoically held fast in this indifferent stream that sought to unearth them. And on their hip they had a child, almost like a purse, like a little baby. And it was this family unit that was holding fast in this indifferent, violent stream of time. And next to them, there was this alien being that looked like a mugwump. If you've ever seen Naked Lunch, the Cronenberg adaptation of the William Burroughs film, there's these creatures called mugwumps. And this looked just like that, but its neck was twisted and broken. It had literally been broken in the breakneck speeds of the stream, twisted, and it just made the wrong turns, And in the midst of this, this family, these beings, these heavenly creatures, to coin a term from the Peter Jackson film, in which these clay sculptures come to life, is what it felt like, this garden of heavenly creatures. They were breathing. Of course, it was my own respiration probably, and my psychoactively induced mind state that was inducing this. And I knew they weren't real. But the way I put it is, I knew they weren't real. They're just how I feel, but they breathe and they love in the face of a stream that knows nothing thereof. It was the sense that the stream of time and the indifference of nature was loveless. It didn't know the thing we call love, but that's our invention. That's something that we bring to it, and our imagination of that, we get to ingress that into the world as a reality as we see it fit. And that's why people are like, I don't believe in love, or like, I've had too many experiences, I'm jaded, which is a rock term. I'm jaded, I don't believe in it. But it's exactly that. It's something we create. It's not something we find. It's not something that, is inherent. It's something we create through our actions and our deeds, which kind of brings us back full circle, right?
Mm.
And it's that
Yeah,
devotional um, unification
that's interesting.
element that's
I
our potential made real, the
Yeah,
word made flesh, if you will.
that's a really awesome story, and impressive how well you can remember that vision as well, because there was many details, and I've
That's many
seen
years
very
ago.
Say it one more time?
And that's many years ago. This is like
Yeah.
2007.
No, I
Around the
could
same time, that same summer as
really
the metronomes, actually, I had a big
Yeah,
epoch of exploration that showed me a lot of things. That see, I'm a very psychedelic person, but I don't partake in substances very often at all because I've absorbed so much from it that I'm still unpacking
absolutely, I know
and
what you mean.
re-encoding into objects
Yep,
and products
makes sense.
that you know.
That's great. That's what you should do, you know? But I was gonna say on the topic of love, I feel as if I've had the understanding or experience of love as gravity. Gravity, in a sense, if we look at gravity as a metaphor, more than some type of physical force, I think that it is love that binds us all in a sense. Whereas you were saying maybe the universe doesn't feel love, but it doesn't know it by that name. And I agree. But I think that it's gravity because even our heart almost has this gravity. And like people, when you're close to each other, you feel it. You know, you
Yeah.
get affectionate, you get
Like a
this
magnet,
feeling
like a
of,
magnetic pull
yeah,
of the unifying factor underlying
yeah.
everything within
So
ourselves.
that's what I think I got an experience of. It's all love,
Right.
and love is the force behind it all. It's not that the universe knows it by the same name and emotion it gives us, but rather that it is gravity pulling things together. And then it also called to me the whole Interstellar movie,
Hmm.
where love could bring someone from the furthest reaches of where a human could even go, like literally not only in actual space and through an actual wormhole to the actual furthest place you could ever get from this earth, but even through the weird astral time warp thing he went through with the black hole, love still brought him out. And that calls to me as why maybe it is one of the most, maybe it's the one of the most powerful forces, or maybe the force binding it all. What do you think of that? Because it sounds like you had a little bit of a different experience there.
Well, because what you're describing, like I would, like you said, gravity, but that feels like something that keeps us, that grounds us. But you were talking more, it seems like about something that pulls us towards each other. So almost like instead of like a vertical gravity, like a horizontal gravity, like a magnetism, right?
Right,
Based on this underlying field.
right.
And the thing is, in that field of love, horrible things also happen. They all
Hmm.
take place in the field of love. In the unified field, wars are fought. In the unified field, people are raped, murdered, betrayed. All this stuff happens. But so it's the choice of attuning to that field and finding an expression of it that expresses that devotion and connectedness and care and attention and mindfulness. But it's
Yeah.
ultimately comes to the choice because that same field can also be expressed by its opposite,
Yep.
which is disconnection, which is violence, violation,
Hmm.
separation, severance.
Yeah.
So again, it comes down to the potential. Love is a potential that can find expression
Right.
um, through our creation.
Lack of awareness
Mhm.
of that feeling. Maybe they weren't given it very much.
And
They
trauma.
don't believe in it. You know what I mean? They don't. It takes faith to believe in love. And
Well, I think trauma is something too that kind of casts us out of the garden. If you'll take the biblical metaphor, it's the thing that banishes us from the garden. Is if you were raised, for instance, in a home that where there was no love, where there was only separation and conflict and drama,
hmm
then that manifests itself as a kind of like eclipsed a wound that eclipses our connection to that place in ourself. Like you said, it pulls us so far outside of ourselves that we're so far away from home we don't even believe that there is such a place.
Right.
And then it becomes, oftentimes, hurt people. That's not a call to action. That's just an observation about how people have wounds, and then they oftentimes will inflict it on others unless they become aware of that and shine a light into that darkness and decide the buck stops here. Again, using banking terminology, to again make that choice to transmutate potential into action and code it into something that leaves that shapes the collective soul in such a way that it reverberates, like the teachers you were saying that leave behind their teaching, so that it's like a guiding light that beckons us through the dark night of the soul and the valley of the shadow.
Right. Yeah, because it is, again, I think that's kind of the mission here, even of this podcast, is to spread awareness of the possibilities, because they don't want you to know about this. Like the systems at play that try to, use us to their end, like they don't want you to know about boundless love and interconnectedness. They want you to think everything but that.
But at the same time, it's the biggest selling product, is a kind of manicured, manufactured version of it, right?
It's like they flipped the thing on its head to where now you think that love is a button you see on Instagram, and not
Right.
the feeling that you get from a good conversation or seeing a friend or having, you know what I mean? It's they're
The they in that system, I think that's more like a program that runs in us. I don't think there's actually somebody out there rubbing their hands together going like, we have to keep love out of the mainstream sort of thing. I think it's just the things we've extracted that we've pulled out of ourselves in order to see what's inside, can often obstruct us from what's within us. I had this insight once where I was moving through a dark hallway, and I could see kind of like this ancestor-shaped light, if you will, in hallucinatory terms, that was kind of like extending itself from the end of the hallway, where a horizon line of light was seeping out from a closed door. And it was forming into these like figures that were guiding me through the dark. So I could see in the dark, technically. And when I opened up the door and the light flooded in and the room came into focus, I noticed this light bulb, which was a false illumination. And I thought to myself, if we can see in the dark, why did we create some external light source to displace that? And then I realized it was a game of hide and seek, that everything we've created outside of ourselves is something that's out there to challenge us to realize it back within ourselves. So all these technologies that we've built are ultimately going to have to be re-internalized realizations. Like we were saying, like it's coming full circle again, we don't need the instruments because it's all inside of us.
Wow, that was absolutely incredible. I think that's a great place to call it, dude. That was awesome.
I think so too, man. This was really fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. So where can people learn more about you, and what different, offerings do you have available?
Yeah. So the central locus is theungoogleable.com, or you could also go to voidandimagination.com. They both land at the same place. On Instagram, I'm void_denizen. And there's, through the website, you can find all these different links too. I've got a little book that's an illustration collaboration with about 35 different artists that each illustrated a different whimsical little verse of mine. The book is called The He and the She of It, that I'm going to be releasing hopefully before the year is out. So if you join my newsletter or follow me on Instagram, you'll see things popping up about that. And there's going to be a limited run of prints of that. And then I have my Patreon, patreon.com/voiddenizen, where I drop exclusive contents, bonus materials from the podcast, spoken word, soundscape spoken word stuff, music, essays, all kinds of things. Oh, and the podcast, of course, Self-Portraits as Other People. Check it out wherever pods are cast.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Michelangelo, for being
Thank you, man. Real pleasure.